I do not for a moment deny that the liquor traffic requires regulation, but it requires more regulation in Europe than it does in Africa because Europe is more given to intoxication. In Africa, all that is wanted is that the spirit sent in should be wholesome and not sold at a strength over 45% below proof. These requirement these requirements are fairly well fulfilled already on the West Coast, and I can see no reason for any further restrictions or additional impost. If further restrictions in the sale of it are wanted, it is not for interior trade, where the natives are not given to excess, but in the larger coast towns, where there is a body of natives who are the debris of the disintegrating process of white culture. But even in those towns like Sierra Leone and Lagos, these men are a very small percentage of the population. If things are even made no worse for him than they are at present, the English trader may be trusted to hold the greater part of the trade of West Africa for the benefit of English manufacturers. If he is more heavily hampered, the English trade will die out. The English trader remain because he is the best trader with the natives, but it will be small profit to the English manufacturers because the trader will be dealing in foreign-made stuff, as he is now in the possessions of France and Germany. English manufacturers, I may remark, have succeeded in turning out the cloth goods best suited for the African markets, but there has of late years been an increase in the quantity of other goods made by foreigners used in the West Coast trade. The imports from France and Germany and the United States to the Gold Coast for 1894, published 1986, were 217,388 pounds. The exports 212.32 pounds, and the consular report for the Gold Coast says that while the trade with the United Kingdom has increased from 1,054,366 pounds, 17 sterling 6D, in 1893 to 1,190,532 pounds in 1894, or roughly 13%, the trade with foreign countries has increased upwards of 22%, namely from 387 pounds to 429,708 pounds. In the Lagos Consular Report, number 150, similar comparative statistics are not given, but the increase at that place is probably greater than on the Gold Coast, as a heavy percentage of the Lagos trade goes through the hands of two German firms. But this increase in foreign trade in our colonies seems to be even greater in other parts of Africa, for in a Foreign Office report from Mozambique, it is stated regarding the Cape Colony that, while British imports show an otherwise satisfactory increase, German trade has more than trebled. There is a certain school of philanthropists. There is a certain school of philanthropists, in Europe who say that it is not advisable to spread white trade in Africa, that the native is provided by the bountiful earth with all that he really requires, and that therefore he should be allowed to live his simple life and not be compelled or argued to work for white man's gain. I have a sneaking sympathy with these good people, because I like the African in his bush state best, and one can understand any truly human being being horrified at the extinction of native races in the Polynesian, Malaysian, and American regions. But still, their view is full of errors as regards Africa. For one thing, I am glad to say the African does not die off as do those weaker races under white control, but increases. And herein lies the impossibility of accepting this plan as within the sphere of practical politics, most certainly in regards to all districts under white control, for the bountiful earth does not amount to much in Africa with native methods of agriculture. It suffices when a percentage of the population were shipped to America as slaves. It now suffices only to help keep the natives in their low state of culture, a state that is only kept up even to its present levels by trade. The condition of the African native will be a very dreadful one if this trade is not maintained. Indeed, I may say if it is not increased proportionally to the increase of white government control, for this governmental control does many things that are good in themselves and glorious on paper, It prevents the slave trade. It suppresses human sacrifice. It stops internecine war among the natives. In short, it does everything save suppress the terrible infant mortality. Why it does not do this, I need not discuss, to increase the native population, without in itself doing anything to increase the means of supporting this population. Nay, it even wants to decrease these by importing Asiatics to do its work in making roads, etc. It may be said that there is no fear of the trade, which keeps the native disappearing from the west coast, but it is well to remember that the stuff that this trade is dependent on, the stuff brought into the trader's factory by the native, is mainly, indeed, save for the southwest coast coffee and cacao, we may say entirely bush stuff, uncultivated, merely collected and roughly prepared, and is so wastefully collected by the native that it cannot last indefinitely. Take rubber, for example, one of the main exports. Owing to the wasteful methods employed in its collection, it gets stamped out of districts. The trade in it starts on a bit of coast for some years, so rich is the supply that it can be collected almost at the native's back door. But owing to his cutting down the vine, he clears it off, and every year he has to go further and further afield for a load. But his ability to go further than a certain point is prevented by the savage interior tribes not under white control, and also on its paying him to go on these long journeys, for the price at home takes little notice of his difficulties because of the more carefully collected supply of rubber sent into the home markets by South America and India. Therefore, the native loses, and when he has cleared the districts reachable by him, the trade is finished there, and he has no longer the wherewithal to buy these things which in the days of his prosperity he had acquired a taste for. The oil rivers, which send out the greatest quantity of trade on the west coast possessions, subsist entirely on palm oil for it. Were anything to happen to the oil palms in the way of blight, or were a cheap substitute to be found for palm oil at home, the population of the oil rivers, even at its present density, would starve. The development of trade is a necessary condition for the existence of the natives and the discovery of the products in the forests that will be marketable in Europe, and the making of plantations whose products will help take the place of those he so recklessly now destroys, will give him a safer future than can any amount of abolitions of domestic slavery or institution of trial by jury, etc. If white control advances and plantations are not made, and trade with the interior is not expanded, the condition of the West African will be a very wretched one, far worse than it was before the export slave trade was suppressed. In the more healthy districts, the population will increase to a state of congestion and will starve. The coast region's malaria will always keep the black as well as the white population thinned down. But if deserted by the trader and left to the government official and the missionary without any longer the incentive of trade to make the native exert himself, or the resulting comforts which assist him in resisting the climate which the trade now enables him to procure, the coast native will sink via vice and degradation to extinction, and most likely have this process made all the more rapid and unpleasant for him by incursions of the wild tribes from the congested interior. I do not cite this as an immediate future for the West African, but a little more and how much it is, a little less and of how far away. Remember, human beings are under the same rule as other creatures. If you destroy the things that prey on them, they are liable to overswarm the food-producing power of their locality. It may be said that this is not the case. Look at the Polynesians, the South American Indians, and so on. But you may look at them as much as you choose, but what you see there will not enable you to judge the African. The African does not fade away like a flower before the white man, not in the least. Look at the increase of the native in the Cape Territory. Look at what he has stood on the west coast. Christopher Columbus visited him before he discovered the American Indians. Whaling captains and seamen of all sorts and nationalities have dropped in on him, frequent and free. He has absorbed all sorts of doctrine, from religious sects, cotton goods, patent medicines, foreign spirits, and, as the man who draws up the Lagos Annual Colonial Report poetically observes, twine, whiskey, wine, and woolen goods. Yet the West Coast African is here with us by the million, playing on his tom-tom, paddling his dugout canoe, living in his palm leaf or mud hut, ready and able to stand more white man stuff, save for an occasional habit of going raving or melancholy mad when educated for the ministry, and dying when he, and more particularly she, is shut up in the broiling hot corrugated iron schoolroom with too many clothes on and too much head work to do, he survives in a way which I think you will own is interesting, and which commands my admiration and respect. But there is nowadays a new factor in his relationship with the white races, the factor of domestic control. I do not think the African will survive this and flourish if it is to be of the nature that the present white ideas aim to make it. But on the other hand, I do believe that he will be called upon to try, for under the present conditions white control will not become very thorough, and in the event of a European war, government attention will be distracted from West Africa, and the African will do then what he has done several times before when white eyes have been off him for a decade or so: sink back to his old level, as he has in Congo after the Jesuits tidied him up, and as he must have done after his intercourse with the Phoenicians and Egyptians. The travelers of a remote future will find him, I think, still with his tom-tom and his dugout canoe, just as willing to sell as big curios the debris of our importations to his ancestors at a high price. Exactly how much he will ask for a devil's patent paraffin oil tin or a Morton's tin I cannot imagine, but it will be something stiff, such as he asks nowadays for the Phoenician agri beads. There will be then, as there is now, and as there was in the past, individual Africans who will rise to a high level of culture, and that will be all for a very long period. To say that the African race will never advance beyond its present cultural level is saying too much, in spite of the mass of evidence supporting this view, but I am certain that they will never advance above it in the line of European culture. The country he lives in is unfitted for it, and the nature of the man himself is all against it. The truth is the West Coast mind has got a great deal too much superstition about it, and too little of anything else. Our methods of instruction have not been of any real help to the African, because what he wants teaching is how to work. Bishop Ingram would have been able to write a more cheerful and hopeful book than his Sierra Leone after 100 years if the Sierra Leoneans had had a thorough grounding in technical culture suited to the requirements of their country, instead of the ruinous instruction they have been given at the cost of millions of money and hundreds of good, if ill-advised, white men lives. For if it is possible for a West African native to be made by European culture into a very good sort of man, not the same sort of man that a white man is, but a man a white man can shake hands with and associate with without any loss of self-respect. It is by no means necessary, however, that the African should have any white culture at all to become a decent member of society at large. Quite the other way about, for the percentage of honorable and reliable men among the Bushmen is higher than among the educated men.